Welcome to CrossTalk with State Senator Mike Brady. It's been a bit since we've had the senator join us, and as the legislative session is winding down here in 2024, we thought it would be a great time for us to get together and have a conversation. Senator, welcome back to CrossTalk.
Thank you for inviting me.
How are you doing?
Good. It's been a busy season, even though the formal session officially kind of ends the end of July. We still had a lot of bills that were in Conference Committee. And what happens there is, if there's a difference between the House and the Senate, the governor presents her legislation forward, and then it goes to the House and then the Senate. Everything starts in the House. If there's a difference between the House and the Senate, where there generally is, we have our own opinions on things, it goes to what's called the Conference Committee. And there's 3 members of the Senate, 3 members of the House. It generally depends on if there's a Republican or Democratic-led Senate, so we'll have 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. And we finally got an economic development bill passed, which was huge. A lot of money for the district, helping out businesses, the areas.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. And then the climate bill and other things. And then we passed the budget. The good news is we've increased local aid to local communities more than ever before. Even though at the federal level things are changing, we're doing pretty well financially at the state level. But, you got to keep your eye on the ball. And thank God that when former Speaker Finneran created that so-called rainy day account, when we've had tough times, you have a savings account. Like you and I having a savings account if things are tough. I know, like, food prices have been through the roof. Yep. I get complaints about friends with eggs. When they went up years ago, and there was a scare on certain diseases. So I was in Hanson one day, and I saw eggs $3 a dozen. So I bought it for my buddy, and I put the $3. I said, and this was on Halloween last year. I said, but don't throw these at the kids trick or treating, But inflation has been up, but other things are down. Interest rates have been, they're talking about lowering them again, so it gives borrowing power. But it's been tough. Housing prices are through the roof. I mean, I get so many young families that, college-age kids getting out of college. Even in Brockton, my house is probably worth about $1 million. It's a multifamily. It's a 3-decker. It's tough for young families to find a place to live, and then elderly people. We have empty nesters out there, and in the towns like the Bridgewaters have a lot of open over 55 units, etc. But Brockton doesn't have the land. There's the old Skyview Drive-In that's over 55, but there's not much else there, and it's tough because these widows or widowers, they're empty nesters. They're living by themselves in these big old houses, and they would love to stay in the community to live in an over 55, but there's not enough. So we've got to work on that. And the good news is, like Boston, even in Brockton, we've turned some of these old office spaces into condos or apartments, and it's workforce development. It's not just low income. Brockton and some of the communities I represent are way over the line with low income. So we're hitting our Chapter 40B legislation, but there's a lot of working class people. So you got a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher. They're starting out. They're not making $1 million a year when they start out, but they want a decent place to live. And we've been able to convert some of these old units into housing, whether, again, as I mentioned, it's condominiums or apartments, and it's pretty classy places. So we've got some state money that came in, like the Brockton Beer Works, for instance. Upstairs, that was the old Kresge 5 and 10, if you remember.
Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah, and I used to say to my mother, "Oh, we're going to the 5 and 10 cent store."
Well, it used to be the Army-Navy Recruitment Center, too, at one time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So we've converted that, but parking is an issue and other things. And then homelessness and there's a lot of situations going on with people with mental health issues or the drug addiction crisis, which, again, we've put more money into this to help addiction with the OxyContins and the fentanyl. But it's still a major issue we got to address. And our old buildings in Foxborough or Taunton, they were living in squalor in those days. And they put them out in these group homes, but you got people that don't get paid much to operate them. Right. And then, they're doing their own thing, which is tough for the community.
Well, let's talk about this past election. You were re-elected.
Yes.
I guess you were up against someone named Blank.
Yes.
Talk to me about going into yet another term serving your district.
Well, I'm fortunate. I didn't have an opponent this year, but my district changed a couple years ago.
Yes.
I always had the city of Brockton, then I had the towns of Whitman, Hanson, Halifax, and East Bridgewater. I used to represent Hanover and Easton and Plimpton, and I still got friends from those towns, and I'll help anybody out. You know how it goes. He got relationships with people. But with redistricting, they added the town of Avon, where my brother was, and he was a good Brady, as you know.
He was.
And then he died,
Bob Brady.
Yeah, 5 years ago to COVID. And then I have the south end of Randolph. So I split Randolph with Senator Walter Timothy, who now is becoming he got elected to the clerk of courts. So there's going to be a new senator there. But I represent 139 South. So it's a different district. They have different needs. And it's a very diverse district. I have a majority-minority district, which I had when I represented Brockton on the State House of Representatives. So different communities have different needs. You know, down in Plymouth County, there's a big issue with water, like Monpont Ponds. And I get money every year in the budget to clean up chronic bacteria. And then I'm a big supporter of cranberries. That's good for your kidneys and all that. But yet, the cranberries have phosphorus that goes into the water that causes chronic bacteria and all that. And so I get money in the budget every year to clean the Monpont ponds down in Halifax and Hanson. And then, you know, the big issue with elderly people, too, like Halifax, they have an old building. It's called Pope's Tavern. It used to be a tavern probably back in George Washington's era. It's not even handicap accessible. They have a ramp for the elderly on the first floor, but there's nowhere to get upstairs. And I've got money in the budget to clean the parking lot at the time, but it's still not enough, and it's tough. And thank God we've got a new, you know, we had a new COA in Brockton, and it was built with state lottery money when Shannon O'Brien was the treasurer, and they're expanding it. That's good, but some of these other towns need better facilities for their elderly.
So interesting enough, this legislative session is seen some legislation that has been passed, including the HEROES Act. Let's talk a little bit about how veterans are going to benefit from this new bill.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I am the chairman of public service, but I also serve on the Veterans Committee. And if not for our veterans, as you know, we couldn't sit here today and have a normal conversation. I'm a big supporter of veterans, so this legislation, I have some paperwork here on this.
Please.
One of the biggest things, we increased Chapter 115 benefits for the veterans, and that's huge, in more commitment to trauma for veterans, PTSD, that's a huge thing with veterans, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, equality for veterans, getting into housing for veterans, and buyback programs, and also to help veterans to put money away. And I ask the veterans too, because a lot of this information, when they get back from serving our country, maybe they get lost in the cracks, as they say. If anybody needs help, please don't hesitate to contact me. My office number is 617-722-1200. We can never do enough for our veterans. And I work also with our federal delegation, Steve Lynch, who represents a good portion of my district. I have some other congressmen as well, Bill Keating and Ayanna Pressley, but Congressman Lynch probably represents most of my district. So we had an issue with the VA in Brockton where a lot of veterans go there for their services. My father, years ago, had a couple strokes, and he always went to the VA in Brockton, had cancer operations in West Roxbury, but when he had the stroke, they rushed him up the old Cushion, which is Good Samaritan now, which is another headache that we dealt with.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. But because he went to the Cushion, didn't go to the VA, they didn't want to handle his records. So he had to switch everything for his veterans benefits to Medicaid and Medicare. So since Congressman Lynch has been involved, we had a minor issue a couple of years ago. They closed the building down. But the thing is, they didn't tell the veterans why is the building closed. This is even before COVID. So if you're a veteran, you're saying, what the hell, is there a disease? What's going on? Blah, blah. It was a water that there's more women veterans now than there was men back in the day. So there was a shower head that had a bacteria, and all they had to do was clean it and clean up. And the thing was, they didn't tell the veterans why the building was closed. And imagine if you're a veteran, all of a sudden the building goes, what's going on here? So Congressman Lynch was right on top of that. We met with the federal delegation. They got it straightened out. And that's what it is about. None of us do it alone. I got a great relationship with our federal delegation, our local elected officials, in working together. And, unlike what we hear in Washington, D.C., where there's battles going on between Republicans and Democrats, I think we work pretty well together in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. No matter what party people serve, I get along great with Bruce Tower. He's part Greek, and I grew up with, as you know, a large Greek community. He's the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. We get things done. Doesn't mean we agree with everything. I don't agree with every Democratic issue, but we come to a common consensus at the end of the day, and we get things passed, and that's getting back to that HEROES Act. That was huge for veterans. We passed the Valor Act, we passed the Welcome Home Bill, but we could never do enough for our veterans. And, you know, I know we just had Thanksgiving, and we're moving into the Christmas, Hanukkah season, but the HEROES Act was huge, and I got to thank my good friend Jerry Cassidy. He was the chairman of veterans. He's moving on now.
Yeah. Outgoing state rep.
Correct, and Bridget Plouffe won the seat. She was his chief of staff, but as you know, we're only as good as the people that work with us, and she did the yeoman's work behind the scenes to get that HEROES Act passed, and I give our staff credit because, you know, they make us look good on a bad hair day, as they say, but we're only as good as the people that are around us, and thank God we got good staff out there.
Let's talk a little bit about the economic bill. I know that there's financial ramifications to it, but there's also for communities. I know the civil service has long been a way for seats to, you know, if somebody's looking for a position, whether it's in the fire department, police department, or talk to us about the economic bill and civil service and how that's going to change.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So I serve on the Public Service Committee, and there's a lot of communities that have filed home rule petitions to get out of civil service. Now, the civil service law has not been updated probably since the 70s. It's long overdue to be updated. So we've had hearings on this. We have, excuse me, unions. We have administrators, we have veterans on the committee, chairmen of different committees, and we've had a lot of meetings on this to upgrade the civil service law. And in doing that, we want to give communities the option to whether they want to get in or out of civil service. Now, civil service was put in to protect people who residency and also veterans, et cetera. And we still, in the new law, it was an amendment to the public service, the economic development bill, but we do protect veterans and we protect different residency issues, but we also give communities an opportunity whether they want to get out of civil service or not. And since COVID and all the things that have happened over the past couple years, a lot of communities are telling me as a chairman of public service, Mike, we're having a tough time hiring police officers, firefighters. We want to expand the list, et cetera. And in a lot of these towns are lacking enough public service, public safety personnel to do these jobs. So this was an amendment in the economic development bill that helped pass, and it gives these communities an opportunity whether they want to get out of civil service or not, but it also protects still veterans and other things. And then there's a lot of money out there for development. So if you want to help a small business get developed, there's state funding for that. Road work, I do a lot of work with the Old Colony Planning Council. Mary Walden runs it. It covers a lot of Plymouth County. We got money for Route 18 down in East Bridgewater. Unfortunately, it's like a long year process. We had a meeting the other day, Route 106, and they're looking to make, right turn only lanes, et cetera. There's a big debate. You got every advocacy group like bike lanes, and I get complaints. Mike, they created more bike lanes, it's tying up traffic. You want to make sure the roads are safe, but you want to make sure traffic is flowing on a timely manner too, because people got to get to work on time, et cetera. So there's money in there for economic development, for road work, and all of that. So there's a lot of good initiatives in there. And I think the big thing, it helps create jobs for the community, and it's a win-win for the Commonwealth of Mass.
How about, I know folks are, when we talk about preserving our planet, we look at rising seas. Folks are fearful of our climate and what man is doing to it. Massachusetts recently passed legislation to hopefully put some measures in place. Can you talk to that at all? Yeah,
we did a climate initiative bill, and sometimes it's a little too strong. Like I don't think the cliche, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. We're trying to get away from fossil fuels. We've seen, like you mentioned, the rising seas and in our environment, and clean air and clean water, et cetera. And you've seen it with the warming of the seas right now. Even though we had a little snow the other day, the sea levels are rising, the temperature's rising. These fish or animals, they're coming more north because the waters are warmer. Yeah. But That being said, you can't, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So, they're pushing for more to get away from fossil fuels with coal and oil and all that stuff, which is great. And I know more people are buying those hybrid cars or whatever, and there's incentives. But again, I'm looking at every alternative. So I've been visiting farms with anaerobic digestion, and what that is, food waste. We have food waste that, the restaurants and the supermarkets had to get rid of their food waste. They put them in these landfills. Well, the landfills are being overcapacitated. They're filling up too quickly. So I visited farms, and I've learned a lot in the past couple of years. I visited farms out in Western Mass. We had some legislation to help farms with anaerobic digestion where they convert food waste into energy. And it's unbelievable. So Noonan Brothers, which was originally in Brockton, they're in West Bridgewater, they bring their food waste to these things. Coca-Cola, Polar Beverages, and they create methane gas. And it's not scaring the neighbors.
But Senator, what about the days of the pig farms?
I know. Well,
didn't that create methane gas as well?
It did, but the odor, that's like, you'd have to have like 100 cows to create what food waste. And of course the odor with...
But I mean, with the old where Massasoit is,
that was the old pig farm.
There was the old pig farm.
Yeah.
Back in the day, people don't know this or not, especially if you lived in Brockton, they used to have these little steel containers in the backyards, and you would put all your...
They call them swirl buckets.
You put all your waste in it in this truck, and you'd see the swarm of flies that would follow this truck. It would have a big old bucket, and they would put all the waste. They'd take that bucket, a gentleman would have to go dump that in, and they would go down to the pig farm, and that would be food that was given to the pigs at the piggery.
And if you remember, Andy Griffith with Mayberry RFD,
sure.
they thought the guy was the poorest guy in the neighborhood, and he owned a big mansion, who was the guy that got the pig farm waste. But it is unbelievable, and I've learned a lot about this. Anaerobic digestion, so it's food waste that they convert into energy. It's in an enclosed container. It's almost as big as a football field. And the methane gas, there's like a balloon top, and they create energy. So it's saving us because you can't keep burying in these landfills. Yeah. And there's no odor, so you don't bother the neighbors. And again, like I mentioned, the sun doesn't always shine, so you can't depend on solar every day.
Yep.
The wind doesn't always blow, even though we've had a few storms and windstorms. But it's another way to put another initiative out there to create jobs. This one guy, we passed the millionaire's tax, right? And everybody thought, oh, the millionaires are going to be running to the hills, moving to Florida and everywhere else. And some did move. But this guy was with BlackRock, right? Created a big initiative jobs, and he created 200 jobs for people. That's a win-win-win. So we gave them tax incentives. And this is one thing in the ECHO bill and other things we've done. We've given tax incentives to small businesses because they're the bread and butter of our local neighborhoods, and they create jobs. And this guy with anaerobic digestion created 200 jobs. He didn't live in Massachusetts, and he's doing a good thing for the environment. And these big companies, like I said, Coca-Cola, like Market Basket, there's a million Market Baskets around the South Shore. They got to put their food waste into a container. This company picks up, they ship it out to these farms, and it's basically cooking it. But you know what's funny? Those stickers that are on the apples that you say 100% natural, they don't biodegrade. They're made with plastic, which is created from oil. So you think, oh, I'm eating an apple, it's healthy, it's 100% natural. After they cook all the food waste, which boils down to create energy, and they even create like hay for the cows, these little stickers still don't break down. So they got to rake them out of that. It's unbelievable. I've learned so much in the past couple of years about this. It's like I've been having a crash course. But ironically, I try to eat healthy once in a while, not all the time, as you know. But these little stickers do not biodegrade. Who would have imagined? And they say 100% natural. So people say, oh, I'm buying fruit that's 100% natural, and it's unbelievable.
That could, if there's anybody who's who is smart enough, maybe they can find a way that it's a biodegradable sticker. Right? Maybe a recyclable sticker that you could put on that would, when it is digested, that they don't have to worry about pay that person to scrape those out of there.
Absolutely. So. And our gas prices, they've come down a little bit, but they were up a couple of years ago, and oil prices, people got to heat their homes and stuff. And part of this legislation helps give incentives to the residents as well.
Let's talk about our hospitals. Not too long ago, Brockton Hospital, Signature Healthcare Brockton Hospital, came back online because it had suffered a major, it was part of a 10-alarm fire that took place that many fire departments were involved with. Some 170 patients had to be moved to other hospitals. They weren't sure if they were going to be able to reopen it, but this also came during a time when the hospital went offline, was when we also had the Stewart medical crisis, the financial crisis.
Right.
How is the state involved with this? So what is the state doing as far as oversight moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you, thank you to our firefighters and our public safety personnel. Luckily, no lives were lost when the Signature Healthcare facility, the Brockton Hospital on 7th Street, had the major fire. And that building was over 100 years old. And as you know, in the olden days, they added to buildings, so there was no laws like they have now with the wiring, et cetera. It took a long time to get online, so the burden on these other hospitals was drastic. Now, as Stewart Healthcare owned the old Cardinal Cushion, which is called Good Samaritan.
Yes.
The South Shore Hospital, my cousin is a nurse there. They were overburdened. Beth Israel down in Plymouth. Even in Boston, the waiting time in these emergency rooms is crazy. Yeah. So finally it got open, and we had some meetings again with our federal delegation. We're helping out. Now, the Signature Healthcare is a nonprofit, so they are able to get help from the state and the federal government to get funding. Luckily, we got that open. They have a new parking lot, which is it creates energy.
It's like a canopy. It's a little solar canopy.
Yeah, solar, exactly. But that is so huge that finally got open, because the other side of the coin with Stewart, that was a for-profit company, and this guy, they've brought him before hearings. He never shows up. They did not pay their bills on time. So, sure, they paid taxes to the city, but WB Mason stopped doing business with them because they didn't pay them. I got electric companies that stopped doing business. They owed companies hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wow. And it was so bad, a backup in the waiting room. We had like 20 people in the emergency room. It's the burden on our healthcare workers, our nurses, our doctors, never mind us as our relatives when they have to go to the hospital. And finally, that got sold, so the Boston Medical Center bought the Stewart Healthcare, the Good Samaritan Brockton. I remember even before COVID, the Morton Hospital in Taunton, it was so bad, they closed the maternity and the pediatrics. They didn't tell the patients. So people that are ready to have a baby going to Morton and Taunton, oh, we don't have maternity. You got to go up to Brockton. More babies were born on Route 24 that year. This is long before COVID. It's been such a drastic nightmare. Finally, that got brought up by the BMC, as I mentioned, some of these other hospitals. But it's too bad, like the Connie in Dorchester and the hospital in Norwood closed because there is still a drastic overburden on our healthcare facilities. And even Mass General, which is one of the best hospitals in the country, that has a waiting list. So it's still, we've made great strides, but there's still, they got to hire more staff. They got to do a better job. And I've worked with both the chairman of the local Stewart Healthcare. He was taking money out of his own pocket to buy supplies for the patients and so forth. They didn't, like one-day surgery. These companies were repossessing the equipment. Like you going for a minor surgery one day, oh, it gets canceled because they repossess the equipment. It's so bad. And imagine the burden on the patients that they do and the nurses there. So finally, BMC took that over. That's getting better. Still taking steps to get back in. And the biggest thing, as we mentioned with Signature Healthcare, that's one of the biggest hospitals on the South Shore. It takes in patients all over the South Shore, not just Brockton. We used to have the Goddard that was online. That was in Stone. That's been closed for years. Yep. So we still need to expand our healthcare facilities, and we've got to do a better job, keep an eye. And again, I'm not against capitalism. If you got a good, decent company that they want to pay taxes, that's great, but you got to keep an eye on the ball, because this guy, and I know that at the federal level they've brought him before to have hearings on this. Who knows if they're going to charge him with things, but he owned hospitals up and down the East Coast, in Texas, and even overseas. And again, if it's a good, decent company to make a profit, God bless them. But he took advantage, and they weren't paying their bills, and then he buys himself a new yacht, as you know, every day, and it just got out of control.
New legislative session will begin in January. What are you looking forward to for your next term, and what do you think are going to be some of the items that the new the state legislature is going to focus on?
Well, I know the former governor did the MBTA's Act. It wasn't under Governor Hill. It was under
Communities
Governor
Act,
Baker.
yep.
Communities Act. And there's a lot of communities that are feeling they're forced into creating these zones. Now, it's not Chapter 40B, it's not low income,
No.
but they feel like they're going to have, illegal immigrants
Create
living in
the
there.
zoning.
Yeah, and a lot of communities are against that. I was at a meeting in Halifax recently, so I think one of the pieces of legislation, we probably got to file some legislation to adjust that, to correct that. There's a big battle. I know I don't represent Milton, but they're filing a lawsuit. So there's a lot of concerns, and the biggest thing is misinformation out there. Again, it's not Chapter 40B, it's not low-income housing, but they had to create a zone. And the cliche, we gotta create more housing. As I mentioned earlier, we got young college kids that are getting out of college. They can't afford. There's no apartments out there available. And then elderly people, we got the empty nesters that are living in these big old houses that their spouse might have passed. So we got to do more for elderly housing, like local districts. And I mentioned the Bridgewater's got a lot of land, but Brockton does not. They got the Skyview driving. So that law, we probably got to look to adjust that. We've got more money every year for schools. I mean, the Student Opportunity Act, the Fair Share Amendment, that's giving more money to schools, but you got to keep an eye on how they're spending it. Brockton ran into a deficit with the school budget last year. We're waiting to see what they come up with this year. And some of these other towns got to submit their budgets to the state and go to the local communities. But funding for the district, and again, as you know, the economy goes in 10-year cycles. We'll have 10 years of good economy, then we have 10 years of tough years. Thank God we have that so-called rainy day account to keep the budget flowing. But we're getting sworn on January 1st. We have some new legislators getting, as I mentioned, Jerry Cassie's retired, so Bridget Plouffe won that seat. We have a new senator down in Taunton area.
Kelly Dooner.
Yeah, Mark Pacheco is moving on, so that's a new senator in that district. Yeah. And you've got to get these new legislators accoladed into the district to tell them, into the society, what's going on. And the big thing, and I tell this to the residents, I was at a meeting with the Old County Planning Council down at it's a place, Maravelle, on Route 18 the other night. And I'll tell you, Mary Walden, the OCPC, does a yeoman's job, because I can only do my job effectively if the people give me the input, which they know their districts more than I do locally. So they've given me different initiatives that they'd like to see. So I got funding for different districts, whether it be road work, whether it be infrastructure, whatever the issue is, and public safety as well. So I asked the residents, don't hesitate to contact me. My phone number at the state is 617-722-1200. And my email is michael.brady@masenate.gov. I want to hear from the residents to see what your needs are, so that way we're prepared right off the gate in January to file the legislation. And it's a 2-year term. And we file legislation, and sometimes things don't happen overnight. It takes a while, and as I mentioned earlier, sometimes there's difference between the House and the Senate, but we come to a common consensus at the end of the day, and we get the ball over the finish line.
It's been a great conversation. We've plumb run out of time. I want to thank you. Just briefly, any big plans for the holiday season?
Well, I usually make the rounds. My brother passed away a couple years ago, so I visit my girlfriend's house for the Christmas season, then I visit my brother's house and my sister-in-law, and then I try to go by some of the high-rises, too, to visit the elderly. I am very lucky. I have a soft spot in my heart. My parents, like your father, which we love, my parents were World War II generation. They're long gone, and I have a soft spot because they fought and died for our country, especially they call it the greatest generation from World War II. And I try to keep inactive with the councils on aging, the senior centers, because they provided the freedom that we have today for us. We could have been run by Nazi Germany if not, or Japan. And there's always trials and tribulations. There's big battles in the federal level, whether it be Israel or Ukraine, and we've got to protect our homeland as well. And public safety is a big thing. We still got to do more. We've passed legislation for mental health, but you mentioned about we still have to do more. There's too many homeless people on the streets. There's drug addiction with this fentanyl and OxyContin one. It's a big issue. We've passed money to get into that, but there's still an issue. And it's not just in the cities. You don't hear about it in the towns as much. And that's a big issue. And infrastructure. Our roads are in deplorable condition. You know, we deal with the weather we deal with, but we've passed money for Chapter 90 money, but we still got to do more for that.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us. We'll look forward to maybe sometime in the new year having you back in to provide a little bit of an update.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for tuning in to CrossTalk shows like this, where we try to keep you better informed as to what's happening, whether it's here in the two communities we serve, Whitman and Hanson, or up at the State House. That's why we have Senator Brady in. Until our next conversation, have a great day.